Recording this workshop, and the information, the recording will be made available to you if you want to go back and review it, or if anyone can't attend a part of it or the whole thing. You are to PhD. As many of you know, because you're part of this program, it's a virtual program that looks to increase the number of North American women and gender marginalized individuals who pursue PhDs in computing. And this is something that we all have a passion and energy for, and we're happy that you're here. There are 4 ways that you are to PhD aims to increase access: mentoring, graduate student mentoring, undergraduate research methods, research engagements and awareness, and what we're doing now, which is the graduate school application workshops. Important to note that this is our focus for this series. The graduate school application workshop series, this is the first of 1-hour workshops designed to have students understand more about how you apply to PhD programs. We're looking to bridge the gap between the first research experience and an enrollment in a graduate program. These, as you may know, these workshops will be held bi-weekly on Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern time. So this time, we have future workshops that we are actively working on and refining, highlighting your personal experiences and interests. Writing a strong personal statement are coming soon, and we're developing more workshops that you'll be able to attend as the semester or as the next few months move forward. Every third Monday of the month at 6 p.m., we'll have additional workshops, how to get involved in research. We'll have an Ask Me Anything session, as well as opportunities to network with other researchers. There's a lot of information online about this, so we encourage you to go to the website and look up information for you all. We have this highlighted here, undergraduate students, and there's various linkages to other programs and other websites that will supplant or augment what we're talking about today. There are certain elements that we're not going to cover in this particular workshop. We're not going to cover necessarily what a PhD is or why you might want to pursue it. And we're also not covering what you do during a PhD to be successful. However, if you're looking for information like that is beyond the scope of this workshop, we encourage you to check out, there's a link here to Computing Pathways, What Degree is Right for Me. This is a presentation that was given in August. Additional resources for those of you who may not yet be interested in applying for a PhD. Again, our focus is for those who have decided to do that. But if you're not quite there, there are other resources available to you, and we encourage you to utilize them. So let's get started with this session. By the end of the session, you'll be better equipped to answer the following 4 questions, and this is how we have structured our hour together today. Those questions are: what does a PhD application consist of? What does the PhD application timeline look like? What do PhD admissions committees look for? And last, how are PhD programs funded? This is our core team. We all have been working together for several weeks now in preparing this material for you. I am Charles Centio. I'm an associate professor at the Rutgers School of Communication and Information. My colleague Samir Patil is at the Calhart School of Computing at the University of Utah. Lori Polat is a program leader. She's at the University of Delaware. And John Bell is a liaison who is at Northeastern. If you have any questions about the program, about the workshops, you can reach us here at this email address. So without further ado, let's get started. As I mentioned, we have structured our presentation according to these 4 questions. So what types of programs will this program, what types of programs will this series prepare you to apply to? We have categorized these as, or refer to them as computing programs. And for our purposes, these programs can include computer science or computing. These programs cover topics in computing theory, AI, software engineering, graphics, bioinformatics, cybersecurity, networks, and data science. Also, information science or informatics also includes computer science, information science, and library science. And then computer and electrical engineering includes computer systems engineering, engineering systems, computational science, and robotics. These are not necessarily distinct fields. It's important to understand, especially when looking at PhD programs, that these overlap quite a bit among various universities, schools, and departments that offer training across these areas. In later sessions, we will get more detail. We will get into more detail concerning these programs. But for now, it's just important to know how we've categorized them and that these are not distinct areas. There's quite a bit of overlap. Here's a list of areas. It's not exhaustive, but this gives you some idea of what computing researchers may pursue in terms of topics. Some of them I've mentioned, like AI. Others I have not, human-computer interaction. I'll let you browse this list of topics. Again, it's not exhaustive. There are many more, but if you're interested in these fields, then you're in the right place. And there are various departments, schools, and PhD programs that may cover them. The actual application. There are 4 major application components. And as I've shared, we're talking about programs across various universities and departments. So there may be some nuance and some difference between specific applications, but this is meant to be a general overview. This is what you can expect to pull together for PhD programs in computing. We have transcripts and GRE scores if they're required. Many programs do not require GRE scores for their PhD program. A resume and CV or CV, letters of recommendation, and personal statements. The large point here is that your application is your opportunity to share your story, what you want to study and why you want to study it. We also want to point out that there's quite a bit of administration that goes along with applying to a PhD programs. For example, requesting letters of recommendation. That may take some time. So it's important to get started as early as possible. And we have a timeline in here that we will encourage you to start on these elements immediately. Make sure that you keep a tight schedule or keep to it tightly because the weeks fly by and these tasks can take quite a bit of time to complete. We'll cover the logistical aspect of putting the application together in subsequent workshops. The application materials themselves, as I've mentioned, transcripts and GRE if required. The point here is to enables you to show your technical knowledge, expertise, and your learning capabilities. The resume or CV, 1 to 2 pages for people at your stage. designed to highlight your research and work experience. Also list and describe your skills, both hard and soft skills. And this is where you can also refer to your online portfolio of technical projects should you have one. About 1 to 2 pages. Letters of recommendation, again, these are rough numbers between 3 and 4 people. And these are individuals who can speak to your intelligence, talents, accomplishments, creativity, perseverance, potential for research, and other attributes that admissions committees are looking for. Typically, this could be former supervisors and or professors that you might have had in classes. And then the personal statement, 1 to 2 pages. This is your opportunity to describe who you are, your experiences, your technical skills, and your interest in research. Why do you want to do the work that you're applying to do? Why do you want to be a researcher? It also is your opportunity to explain your area of interest. As I mentioned on the previous slide, there are many different areas that comprise computing, and this is where you can detail your interests and experiences. You also can refer to your work experiences, the roles you've had, and also personally, what you have done, what you have learned to get to where you are. It is a personal statement. This is just a high-level overview, and we offer workshops in these specific areas. So official transcripts from all undergraduate and graduate institutions. And it's typical for programs to require official transcripts, even if you did not graduate from a program. So if you took a summer class at another institution, or you took a few classes and didn't graduate necessarily, official transcripts from all programs where you have taken courses. As I mentioned, the GRE, or Graduate Record Examination, is becoming less and less important for admission or funding, but some programs may still require you to submit official scores. So keep that in mind as you look at different programs and you plan out your application cycle. Most programs that require the GRE will say so explicitly on their website. So this should not be something that is hard to find. And also when those scores are due. Keep in mind that there's also a fee to take the GRE as well as a fee to send the scores. And we encourage you to refer to the official website for current information. That's ets.org. Again, ets.org. Just to give you an idea, currently the price is $220 with partial waivers available. As I mentioned, the GRE is becoming less and less vital, but you want to make sure for the programs that you're applying to understand if that's required. Also, if you can investigate expected score ranges so that if a program does require the GRE, you can take a look at what the range they expect their applicants to score in. You also want to prepare for the exam, and taking practice tests is a huge help. You also can retake the exam if you think that you can do better, you can score better, especially if you've never taken it before. Taking it the first time can be a tremendous learning experience. But keep in mind that previous scores will appear on your application. As I've mentioned, here are some additional resources for you to learn more about the GRE. Resumes. Resumes are designed to give you an opportunity to showcase your academic background, your work experience, which can include internships, as well as your research experience. If you have publications, that's where they would go. What skills you have acquired, you have developed. This is where you can also include your extracurricular activities. And extracurricular activities are actually looked at and discussed in admission. You can also include your own portfolio if you have one, or your personal website. Again, we will review these materials in subsequent workshops in detail. The personal statement, that's where you tell your story. It is personal. It is designed for you to showcase who you are, what makes you who you are, and why you want to pursue the types of research that you're applying for. It really gives the reader an idea of who you are as a person. Again, we'll review this material in detail in subsequent workshops. Letters of recommendation. Typically 3 to 4 are required, and they can come from multiple sources. I mentioned faculty earlier. You want to have at least one letter from a faculty member that you've worked with. For example, beyond just had them in class, but you've actually done some work, some project work with them. We want to avoid letters from TAs and try to look for or identify faculty who have taught you in upper division or upper level courses. You can also venture out of your core major, faculty from other disciplines. We understand it might be hard to have 3 or 4 computing professors that know you well enough. So it's okay to have letters from faculty in related fields, electrical engineering, math, etc. You may also include a letter from your supervisor, say from an internship, and they can certainly speak to your work experience as well as who you are as a person. So we would encourage you today to start thinking about who you might ask, who might be candidates for you to approach for a letter of recommendation for your application. Timeline. These are some rough general timeline guidelines. And this is something that we've put together based on our own experiences, both as PhD students as well as in advising PhD students. So September, October, that's now. Update your resume, select schools to apply to, and yes, you may reach out to faculty. You can draft your personal statement. As I mentioned, identify letter writers. And if necessary, study for and sign up for the GRE again, if they're required. November, December timeframe, a few short months from now, you can actually approach letter writers and ask them formally for their support in providing you a letter. Again, we'll go over the specifics for this in subsequent workshops. In order to write a robust letter, the person has to know quite a bit about you. So you may need to give them your resume. You may also need to give them drafts or discuss your personal statement. You might even highlight the courses you've taken. Remember, if you've had a professor in class and you may have worked with them, that doesn't mean necessarily that they have an understanding of what classes you've taken. And then submitting applications. We're thinking by the end of this year. So November, December will be the time frame for you to approach letter writers, share with them a resume, which should be completed, your personal statement, and to just get your application materials together and ready for submission. January, March of 2025, early next year, that's when you can expect to receive a decision on admission and then funding. You may also visit schools, actually go and make trips and visit the campuses, and then make a decision about where to go. We've prepared a detailed timeline and checklist for you to use. So we encourage you to copy that URL. It's in the chat as well. And use that document as a way to keep track of the various activities that we have outlined here, and use it to guide you and help you as you navigate through pulling these materials together and pulling your application together. What do the reviews look like? So for undergraduate admissions, typically, this is again a general overview, admitted by a university's admissions office, and the timeline is expected between mid-March and early April. However, for graduate admissions, we find that that is more by a program or department, and decisions are typically expected by April 15th. Again, there's no standardized process, but keep this in mind as a general guideline. And also keep in mind that many programs have what's called rolling deadlines, meaning that they'll continue to accept applications. However, pay close attention to when they would like those applications submitted and submit them by then, because many applications received, oftentimes applications received after a deadline will not receive a full review. Who are the people that are deciding upon admissions? Well, typically there are committees, groups of people who review application portfolios. They may request additional information if needed. And then faculty, a group of faculty will typically review candidates and advocate for strong candidates, typically within their own areas of expertise. Some may conduct either remote or in-person interviews for further assessments. Again, this isn't standardized. Some programs require or encourage interviews while others do not. And typically after admissions decisions are made, departments will invite admitted applications to visit campus. They will pay for and sponsor your trip to campus to get to know not only faculty and staff, but also other PhD students. How to maximize your opportunities, your chances for admission. It's really important to engage with faculty, because individual faculty may review applications that are aligned with their interests. And identifying and connecting with faculty can improve your chances for admission, because faculty may advocate for certain applicants who have contacted them, who they have had conversations perhaps or met with, and they know that they would be good fits for their particular program. We find that a good strategy would be to apply to multiple programs in order to enhance your opportunities. And as I mentioned earlier, make sure that you pay attention to the application deadline and get your materials in by then. We'd also like to point out that our October 9th workshop will cover specifically finding the programs that are right for you. So selecting which programs to apply to. Also note, we have an asterisk at the bottom there, that there are factors outside of your control that may influence admissions decisions, such as faculty on sabbatical, on leave, or even retiring. So just keep in mind that there are factors in terms of connecting to faculty that will be beyond your view. However, many faculty will share with you if they have breaks coming up, retirement and or sabbatical. How are programs funded? Important to keep in mind that admitted PhD students should expect some funding support. This is distinct from undergraduate or master's programs, where that expectation isn't always there. However, for PhD programs, you should expect some funding. An admission decision can be very different from a funding decision. By that, we mean there's one decision on admission, but then another decision regarding funding. One of the reasons to make your application as strong as possible is because it is viewed for admission, and that application is also viewed to make funding decisions. Stronger the application, the better the chances at admission and funding. Typically, admitted students are offered some sort of funding support, which can come in various forms, like TA or teaching assistantships, as well as research assistants and or fellowships. And it's not unusual for a student to have a mix of these over the course of their PhD journey. So don't let that deter you if you get to the point where you're admitted and your funding package might be a little bit confusing. What you'll find is that programs are trying to find funding that will support you. And three general buckets of that support are TAs, research assistants or RAs, or fellowships. Keep in mind that this funding may not be guaranteed for your full PhD journey, which can last between 4 and 7 years. And funding is usually dependent on you making appropriate progress towards your degree. Many PhD programs have like annual reviews where each student is reviewed based on their progress towards the degree. So you want to ensure that you're making appropriate progress, and there will be people, faculty around, who can confirm that. And that funding may be dependent upon your making appropriate progress. Also, amounts may shift during your PhD study. However, in our experience, most programs make every effort to support funding once you're admitted and you decide to matriculate, and you're making appropriate progress towards graduation. There are a variety of funding sources earmarked for domestic students. So, in summary, keep in mind that computing programs can exist under various types of colleges and departments. There are 4 major components to a PhD application for computing programs: the transcripts, GRE scores, resume or CV, personal statement, and letters of recommendation. It is quite time-consuming to apply to PhD programs. So make sure that you have time in your schedule to devote to this. And the actual admissions process can vary from program to program. What we've offered here are just general guidelines. And last, typically, PhD programs in computing are funded. They offer some type of funding support. So with that, we'd like to take your questions or comments, and we look forward to working with you in subsequent workshops.
Uh, can I add something about the funding part?
Sure.
So in addition to support that the university itself may provide, there are many other avenues open for, especially for domestic students. So for example, the NSF has the Graduate Research Fellowship Program that you can apply to that supports a PhD funding for 3 years. And then your university will basically fund the other remaining portion of the PhD. Um, Industry or companies like Meta or Google also have, or IBM have PhD fellowship programs that they may cover 1 or 2 years or multiple years of your PhD. So in addition to the support you uh, might get from your institution, there are other sources of funding that you can pursue. Uh, and sometimes it depends, right? So the amounts from the NSF or industry might be slightly higher in terms of stipend than what the university can give you. The other thing I would add is um, usually the funding that you would get from a university program, it covers your tuition and fees, and then you get a monthly stipend. So the stipends can vary, especially because different universities are in different areas. But typically, the intent is that the stipend should cover your rent and living expenses, um, and without you having to borrow money or spend extra for it.
Thanks, Samir.
There is a question in chat about a fellowship deadline that is coming up and how to approach the PI for a letter of recommendation. Um, it's a little hard to answer without knowing what specifically the fellowship is, but in general, uh, general advice is if you think a letter writer would be a good person to ask, you can always email and say, I'm thinking of applying for this, and would you be okay with writing me a letter of recommendation? And then, give them also some idea of by when you need it, so that people know whether it's feasible given the schedule or timelines that you face. So Charles, there is a question in chat about, generally speaking, how many programs should I apply to?
Uh, there's the it depends answer. I would encourage students to apply to as many programs that they have time and money for. Some of these applications may come with a cost, a financial cost, as well as just the cost of putting the application together. But keep in mind that the cost of putting one application is quite daunting. But once you do one, you're well on your way to do another and to tailor them. So I would encourage you to um, apply to as many as you can.
Um, yeah, and I would maybe I would add to that. Most programs do have application fees. However, uh, especially for domestic applicants, many programs have no application fee, or you can ask for an application fee waiver. So you might be able to bring application costs down if you should proactively ask for those waivers because um, if you don't ask, they'll just charge you the fee. Um, so that's something that I would recommend. And again, some of this, it depends, is based on whether you have specific constraints or not, right? In terms of geographical areas or other things. So in general, the fewer the constraints you have, the more widely you can apply. Um, I would also recommend kind of diversifying your portfolio, so to speak. So, if you apply just to the top 5 universities or top 10, uh, you might not get into any of them. And so it's always a good idea to kind of apply to a few that are the very top, some that are in the middle, and a couple that for sure you will get into. So that way, when you get your decisions back, you're likely to have multiple options to choose from. That said, I would recommend against applying to a place where you definitely know you will never go, because that's just wasting your time and also everybody else's time. So my advice tends to be, if this is the only university that you get into, um, if you can see yourself going there, then consider applying. If you don't think that you will ever go there, then don't. Oh, there is another question about differences in application process for PhD programs at international universities. Um, so this particular workshop series is for applying to PhD programs in the US. We will not be covering applying to international universities. Um, However, yes, there are differences, and so it really depends on which international location you're talking about. That's the short answer. Charles, do you want to add anything in that regard?
No, that's I think you've captured it. It's and frankly, I don't know a lot about applying to international, universities. I Most of the experience I have is international students applying to domestic. But I guess I would say just encourage you to reach out to the admissions people there, probably listed on their website, and explore what nuances or what differences that may exist there.
Next question in chat is there a preference toward the CV instead of a resume for computing PhD applications?
I'm used to looking at CVs, so if you have a choice, then but I don't know if it matters all that much as long as the content is there at your stage.
Yeah, I would echo that. In fact, you don't even have to call it a resume or CV. You can just put your name and address at the top. And then the rest is really depends on what content you have in there. Uh, so what you call it is way less important than what's in it. And I believe we're going to have a resume slash CV focused workshop that will cover that in more detail. Uh, Recommendation letters from employers, less important than from professors. Are recommendation letters from employers less important than those from professors?
Uh, these are difficult to answer definitively. I would say that since you're applying to be a student to study and to learn how to conduct research, I would think now, depending on what the employer is, if you were employed at a research shop as a researcher, then that might be more important than a professor who had you in a class and you worked on a project with them. But essentially, what you want as you whittle down your letters of recommendation, you want the people who can speak most directly to your potential as a researcher. So, absent a research employer, I would say generally a professor, but again, it may depend on your specific experience.
I would add to that because there's a little bit of nuance, especially depending on which area of computing you're applying for. If it's more of an applied area, then industry experience or your experience in building things, or say if you're applying for a data science PhD and you've been working on some data processing in your internship or job, then that's fine. So really think of it as, can this person speak to skills, research or applied or development that you would expect to need in pursuing your PhD. So that's one. And I would also say that no single letter is, it's not looked at on its own, right? That's why we ask for three or four. So different people can speak to different parts of your experience or skills. And so I wouldn't necessarily uh, think of, just one single letter being the most important or least important, but think of the set as a whole speaking to your ability to do the research or pursue the line of work that you want to do in the PhD. Next question is, if I spent most time doing experiments and research with the PhD student and only have weekly meetings with the prof, would it still be better to ask my prof for a letter of recommendation?
Um, Generally, it's probably better to ask the professor who may actually collaborate with the student that you have worked with. So, generally, you'd want a letter coming from a professor, but that doesn't mean that the PhD student couldn't have input into it. It would kind of depend on your relationship with the professor, how much exposure you've had to them, and you could even ask the PhD student. You could say, "Hey, I know we've done a lot of work together. You probably know more about my um, potential as a PhD student. However, I understand that the letter needs to come from a professor. How do you recommend that I approach them?" And that PhD student, especially if they've worked with a professor for a few years, might be able to help you get the letter from the professor, but with input from the PhD student.
Right. And I would also add that most likely what will happen is the professor will say in the letter that the student worked with my PhD student and the PhD student had great things to say. And I've also interacted with the student. So something like that. So I would say in a case like this, it's best to ask both and let them figure out the best way. But generally, it would be better if the professor writes the letter with input from the PhD student and then says in the letter that that's what was done. There is another question in chat specifically about my area of interest, human-centered computing and usable security and privacy. Um, and so the person is asking what constitutes a strong PhD applicant in this particular area. Uh, so I would say, first of all, this answer actually might be applicable to all areas. What would constitute a strong PhD applicant in any area, first of all, is that you demonstrate a strong undergraduate record, interest in research, for example. Perhaps you've done your internship in related areas. You might want to show some leadership or creativity. So just in general, taking initiative, being interested in research, demonstrating that you're interested in whichever area that happens to interest you. The other thing would be in your statement, pointing out or connecting to why is it that you're interested in that specific area, as well as what is it that, do you have some ideas that might advance the field or the kinds of research that you want to do in that specific area. So that's something that would make a strong PhD applicant in any area. If you happen to have any publications, either published or submitted or under preparation, that's another thing that application committees look for. Any kind of scholarships, honors that you might have received. All of those things are things that faculty and admissions committees look for, regardless of area, right? So this applies really generally to all research areas, not just to the one, that was asked in the question. Charles, is there something you want to add in that regard?
Yeah, I think you've covered it. Some of these, as you've heard us say, there are no definitive rules. A lot of it depends, but the key is if you're asking this person to write, then you have some kind of relationship with them. And this would be a good way for you to get comfortable or get your own voice in terms of asking for letters for application. Once you matriculate and you make your way through a program, you'll be asking professors for a lot of things as you go. So this could be a good way to kind of feel comfortable or get comfortable with that kind of a request.
Next question is it feasible to apply for competitive programs with no publications?
Publications are always better. That's kind of the currency of research. We show our both our quality and our productivity based on papers. More and more so. I think I've seen the even in the short time I've been a professor, I've seen where students are applying with publications. Um, so is it feasible? I I guess and I'm interested in Samir's input here. I wouldn't say don't apply if you don't have publications. However, just know that being part of an author team is something that lives forever, and that it only helps. And if you're interested in research and you're here, obviously you're interested in research, then we can certainly speak to how to get yourself on paper teams. Papers are being written all the time, all around you if you're doing research. And there may be ways that you can actually um, more intentionally get on papers. I'm working with a handful of undergrads now in my lab, and we're working on a paper together, and I'm kind of showing them how to write as we go. So I would encourage you to, if you're doing research, if you're working in a research setting, you might need to speak up and say, hey, I'm interested in having authorship. I'm interested in doing the work that requires authorship, because some teams won't assume that you do. And you might need to lean forward a bit with that and request that you would like a role that resulted in authorship on a peer-reviewed journal paper.
So maybe I can add something and perhaps offer. So first of all, you can always apply to any program, right? There's no qualifications necessary to apply or not apply. It does definitely make your application more competitive if you have publications. Having said that, uh, most applicants coming in straight out of bachelor's degree, again, and I don't know about the very top programs, but at least outside of the top five, I would say top five or top 10, most applicants who are coming straight out of bachelor's degrees do not necessarily have publications. So, it's only a smaller percentage who come in already with publications. So that's one. The other thing I would say is there may be publications take time. And so it may be that something is under preparation or it's been submitted and is under review. And if that's the case, you can note that and but clearly make it obvious that this is not published yet, right? This is been submitted or it's under preparation. There are some questions in chat about things like workshop papers, poster presentations, lightning talks. All of those are valid. So you could potentially uh, put them in a publication type or output products list, but make sure that it's very clear that, okay, this is a journal paper, this is a conference paper, this was a presentation, this is a lightning talk, this was a poster. So that way, even if it's a single list, it's pretty obvious that there are different kinds of products in there, and all of those matter. And the last thing I would say is that even if you don't have publications, if you've done research projects or there are these research experience for undergraduate opportunities, either independent studies or university research programs, put that as research experience, because you may not have publications, but if you've shown inclination for research, if you've participated in any kind of research programs or initiatives, that counts. And so, programs will evaluate your record on the whole, not necessarily just on one factor or just counting that, okay, this person has 3 publications, this person has 1 publication. They'll look at, and which is why this whole packet that we talked about earlier, right? The personal statement, your resume and CV, your letters of recommendation, all of that tell your story, and publications is just one part of it. And different people have different strengths and different experiences, and that's taken into account. I know that was a pretty long answer, but hopefully that was helpful. So let's see, more questions are coming in.
Okay.
If I recently realized that my paper was published in what is considered likely to be a predatory journal, and I'm the first author, could this negatively affect my admission? That was corrected to submitted and not published. So
I
if you,
guess Go
Yeah, go
ahead,
ahead,
Sydney.
Charles. Sorry.
I was just going to say that if you're predatory journals are predatory, they're called that for a reason. That's a pejorative. They're not viewed positively for many good reasons. And if it's submitted and not published, any paper that's been submitted can be redacted, right? You could just withdraw the publication. Now, your first author, which tells me, at least in the field that I'm in, that you have quite a bit of control over the paper and it's yours, first. That's what first author usually means. So I would I would encourage you. I'm interested in Samir's input here, but if it's a predatory journal, and you might not have known that when you submitted it, if it hasn't been published, you could always withdraw it and try to submit it to a journal that isn't predatory.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest is that if it's submitted and not published, even if it is actually accepted for publication, you as the author have the right to withdraw it. Uh, so I would say that in this case, you might want to consider just saying that, okay, we're withdrawing the submission and then take that submission elsewhere. There's
Just
a question here.
uh,
If I did research in subfield of AI during undergrad, but don't think this research direction fits my long-term research interests and goals, is it possible to pivot and apply to other subfields of AI ML?
well, as Samir said, you can apply. You can always apply. That's the onus is on the applicant. So that's where your personal statement can really help explain who you are and how you arrived at where you are. Keep in mind that the PhD personal statement is used for admission and funding, but it's not a contract. No one goes back and says, "Hey, well, you said you would be studying this, and now you're ready to take your comprehensive exams, and your interest is elsewhere." It's okay. Your a PhD program is a long program. You're expected to learn and experience different things, and your interests may shift. So, I encourage students to embrace that journey. And as you meet certain people, as things happen in the world, as you have classes or you have research experiences, your research interests are expected to shift a bit, not change completely 180 degrees, but it's actually quite understandable and expected for your research interests to sort of move around a bit. And that's actually something that we expect and that is welcome. So use your personal statement to help describe that journey. And as I tell students and my teams in various contexts, when in doubt, tell the truth. So the best personal statement, the best application is the one that's truthful. So if you've had a shift in interest, state that, state why, and state where you're headed.
I think that's great, and I'll also add that it's actually not that uncommon for interest to shift. In fact, early on, even after joining the PhD program, in the first year or two, you may take some time before you find the focus for your dissertation, and so it's perfectly okay. And by the way, sometimes even I know it's typically rare, but people do change completely, right? It's the next thing they're doing has absolutely nothing to do with the previous thing they've done. And especially if this was something you did in undergrad and it's different in grad school, that's fine, because something that's common across areas is the process. So there is a mindset, there is a process uh, about what is research, what constitutes knowledge production, all of those things. So even if the area was different, the fact that you had some research experience itself is useful, because you've learned something that you can carry with you to any area. So the next question is, I've applied before to the program and now I'm pivoting in discipline. Would there be additional considerations in the application components that will matter more than the first time I applied? So the first thing I would say is that there is an application committee and the admissions committee that reviews applications, and that committee changes year to year. So If you applied last year, this year's committee will probably not know anything about that particular application. And even if they did, your recent application is just going to stand on its own. So I personally would say I wouldn't worry at all about the previous application, um, and just focus on the current one that you're working on independently. Charles, what do you think?
Yeah, I would corroborate that. Just you want to keep things as clear and simple as possible. Keep in mind that the readers of your application will be reading a whole stack, and you just the better application, the better paper is the clear one. So try to be as clear as possible with your interests and your journey, and it's your own. So embrace it and put your best foot forward.
Uh, so hold on, there was another
Yeah.
question here. If I worked in an undergraduate research lab but didn't have a very positive relationship with the professor, is it still recommended to ask the professor for a potentially weak letter? Would it look strange if I mentioned the experience in my resume but didn't ask the professor for a letter?
Let's take the second part first. No, it wouldn't look strange if you have, in my opinion, if you had professional experience on your resume, but you don't have a letter from that experience. I think that's fine. Frankly, I don't think we scrub resumes and match them up with letters to that degree. So that would be unusual for even someone to look at that. Now, as far as the first part of the question, I guess I would want to know what do you mean by not very positive, right? Because there are various reasons why research doesn't go according to plan. But if you have sort of a personal run-in with a professor, if they um, express dissatisfaction with your work or you express dissatisfaction with how they work, then that's probably not a person you want to get a letter from. However, if the funding ran out early or you had problems collecting data or a co-PI might have retired or left the school. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why relationships in research teams might get strained. And if it's not personal and if it's not about your work, then you might consider asking them. However, if it is personal or is about your work, then yeah, you might not want to ask them. But know that in most professors, if we're not going to be able to write a positive letter, either because we don't know you well enough, which is very common, or if we don't think that we have a lot of good things to say, we have a myriad of excuses as to why we can say no. I don't. I'd rather not write, or I don't think I can write a letter for you at this time. So if you have a doubt, if you're teetering on the decision, ask them and see what they say. We turn students down all the time for different reasons that they have no idea why we're turning them down. And I shouldn't say all the time, but we have a long list of excuses and reasons why we can't write letters. And usually, like I've never written a bad letter for a student because I would feel awful doing that. So I would just not write a letter.
Yeah, I would say it's better not to get a letter than to get a weak letter or a negative letter. There are tons of other possibilities where you can get letters. So just be creative and think of other people. The next question is, if I did research in some subfield of AI during undergrad, but don't think this research direction fits my long-term research interests and goals, is it possible to pivot and apply to other subfields of AI ML? I believe this was covered in the previous thing that we just answered, but I would say something about AI ML specifically. Uh, I believe that across the board, all universities are getting a lot of applicants in AI and ML, specifically, as you might imagine, because this is the latest buzzword. Um, However, many of these applications do not typically recognize that there's a difference between applying AI and ML to certain problems versus actually advancing the state of the art in AI and ML. So many applicants, I would say even be as bold to say majority of the applicants who claim to want to do AI ML actually don't want to do basic research in AI and ML, but are more interested in the applications of AI and ML. And that's a very different kind of approach. So if you are particularly considering any kind of AI ML or writing AI ML in your statements, I would encourage you to think very critically about what exactly it is that you want to use that AI and ML for or are interested in, and how would you set yourself apart from the tons of applicants who are all claiming that they are interested in AI and ML. And as you might imagine, right, the number of faculty members who can advise AI and ML, core AI and ML applicants in any department uh, is limited, right? So they can't take every single person who's going to apply for that. So that's just something to keep in mind specifically for AI and ML, especially because I know that it's a hot area that everybody seems to want to go to. Charles, do you have any insight here?
Yeah, I would just reiterate what Samir said. I mean, it's such a exploding field that people are slapping AI and ML on a lot of things
Or,
that
or NLP, right? Or natural
or
language
NLP,
processing. Yeah.
exactly. So, um, large scale qualitative analysis, NLP. It's like so just I wouldn't get too caught up in the taxonomy of it all. Focus on what work you want to do and why you want to do it. And even if you call it a subfield of AI, that doesn't mean that the person reading it is going to agree with what you're calling it. Not that that would be bad, but they just might have a different interpretation. That's okay. I don't think it's going to tip the scales in terms of your application.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I was saying is be very clear on what you mean by AI and ML, because in majority of cases, it's not entirely clear what the applicant actually wants to do with AI and ML. I think we are out of time, as Julia said in chat. Um, we thank you for the active participation in the Q&A, and we look forward to seeing you in the next workshop in the series in 2 weeks from now.
Yes, thank you.
Charles and Samir, before we close out, did you want to show the next slides?
The of the next session.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that's right. Let me share. Julia keeps us straight here.
Yep.
So here's our schedule. Yes, how could we forget this? So next session, highlighting your personal experiences and interests. This is our schedule of workshops with topics over the next couple of months. So we encourage you to mark these down and prepare as much as you can. As we've said, we have a timeline that we laid out that we think will help you as you prepare your applications. So think about what these topics entail, and to the degree that you can think about your own applications, that will help you connect what we're sharing with you to your own applications and your own experiences. So for the next session, reflect on what your specific goals and objectives are to motivate you to even be here to pursue graduate study. And as Samir indicated, think about clarity in terms of what kind of research that you want to do. It's not a straightforward question always to answer. And then work on your first draft of your resume if you haven't already. If you have, then update it accordingly.
Great. See you in 2
Okay.
weeks.
See you in 2 weeks. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And thanks, Julia, for handling all the logistics.
Yes.